Welcome or welcome back to Derri's Read It Before. I'm Derri and I've read it before, and I started my channel so that I could talk about the books I've read multiple times. In that vein, today I'm going to continue talking about the realm of the Elderlings, and we're up to Assassin's Quest. We're up to Assassin's Quest. I am going to start spoiler free, which turns out is tricky because of the way Royal Assassin ended. Book 3 of the Farseer trilogy picks up where that book ended. So for spoiler free, it makes it really hard to describe what's about to happen, but I'm going to give it my best shot. It's important to know, I think, going into Assassin's Quest, that this can be quite a divisive book, and it tends to fall into two camps. There is the camp that has become very emotionally invested in Fitz, the character, and there is the group that is truly intrigued by the overarching plot elements and not so much in Fitz. Often the people who fall into that camp can be quite annoyed by Fitz. So it's important to know that if you haven't got that emotional connection to Fitz, this is going to feel like a really long book. It's going to feel bloated. You're going to get to the end of it and think, there was a lot there that didn't need to be there. Please do continue. The things that are in this book are very important to the series overall. And while I agree that the trilogy should stand alone as a beginning trilogy, it should have an end, and you should feel satisfied with that end. You mostly will. Again, if you're a Fitz character person, you'll be perfectly happy with the ending. If you're a plot heavy person, the ending is going to feel very rushed because this is Fitz's story, and Fitz isn't present for some of the ending elements, so you don't see them clearly. You only see what he knows about how this comes to a conclusion. But that doesn't make it any easier for those of you who aren't as invested in Fitz and you want to read a trilogy that's satisfying. All I can say is read Life Ships and balance the two and decide whether or not those two sets of storytelling styles are worth continuing for, because that's what you're going to get moving forward. So that being said, the title of this book gives you a lot of information. This is a quest, and it's a quest in the very truest sense. There's a lot of travelling in this book. I separate this book into 3 sections, and I actually looked at it earlier to see if I could work out roughly where in the book it falls. And it turns out it's 5 sections, because the thing I consider the middle bit has a chunk in the middle of it, so the true centre of the book, that is different to the pieces either side. So that big middle section is travelling. There's a lot of travelling. There's like a good 60-65% of the book is spent simply moving from point A to point B. Point A being Buck, and point B being the location of the prince they're looking for. There is a section in that travelling where it stops for about 10%, and it goes from a single person travelling to a small group of people travelling. So, but you're still getting travelling, which can put a lot of people off. And these sections are where those complaints come in about pacing, because that first 10-12% of the book has a lot happening. It's dealing with the events from the end of Royal Assassin, and it's causing a situation to create this quest. And it's incredibly powerful. It's a strong start to a book, and then it just slows down. You're just walking, you're just travelling, and if you're not invested in Fitz and you're not enjoying just hanging out in his head with Night Eyes, you're not you're not going to really enjoy the next significant chunk of the book, and that can make it really hard to sell this as a series. If you are invested in Fitz, you're not going to have a problem. You're not even going to notice this change of pace. You'll be perfectly happy with it. And the quest takes him across the Six Duchies. Night Eyes is incredibly useful at this point of the story. I mean, he's a wolf and they're travelling. Having a wolf alongside you is going to help. But he has his share of adventures, and you do get some separation of him as a character. This is the book where he stops being an adjunct to Fitz. This is the book where Night Eyes becomes his own character. He has his own path. He has his own thoughts. He has his own driving motivations. And so you get to know Night Eyes as an individual, which can be really satisfying. So keep that in mind. Fitz goes through various trials and tribulations, and is captured and is escapes and is captured and escapes, and because it's a quest book, that can be tiresome for people who just want to get to the next plot point. But it is a quest book, and it's a truly old-fashioned quest book, which means he's going to encounter along the way people who teach him things. He's going to have to learn about himself to some degree in order to keep moving forward. And like a very traditional quest, every encounter he has builds the things he needs to keep going. And these are all important things. And while this is happening, it's a first-person POV. It can feel very narrow in scope, but occasionally Fitz will branch out. And this is the advantage that Robin Hobb has given Fitz as an author, to see what else is going on in the world. So we do check in with some characters that we have lost contact with, because Fitz is having a skill dream about them, and so we see what's happening to people in various places. And I'll talk about that a bit more when I get to spoilers. But there's all the travelling, and I told you it pauses for a minute in the middle of all the travelling. And this is where Fitz reconnects with some of the characters from Royal Assassin. And it's a very cathartic time, it's a very emotional time, and the dynamics between characters shift quite significantly in that period. And ultimately, they start travelling again, but now it's in a group. So the dynamic changes, it's a bit more interesting to read, there's more interplay between characters, and again, that interplay is designed to teach you about them. This is what's going to trigger them. This is what's going to stress them out. And for plot-driven people, this is going to feel like a waste of time. For character-driven people, this is going to teach you a lot about these characters, because it is drawn out. And it's drawn out deliberately. I think Robin Hobb really wanted you to get a sense of how futile it feels sometimes to go on a quest, because there's so much of nothing. You're travelling in the hope of something, and hope is a difficult thing to keep alive. So there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of drama, and because of tension and drama, you get a lot of friction in that small group of people. Even Night Eyes plays a role within that tense group of individuals. When we finally get to our end point of the quest, things pick up again, plot things are happening, and the end portion is about 15-20% of the book, and you learn a lot of important things about the lore. And some of these things are going to kind of float in the general world building pool of knowledge that you've got. Try and hang on to it. Everything you learn here is important. And you get the big cataclysmic ending. You get winning, as much as Hobb ever gives you winning. and the story winds down in the last sort of 2 or 3% of the book as Fitz deals with the aftermath of winning. So that's ultimately what you're getting in Assassin's Quest. You're getting a really long journey, you're getting a lot of character, you're getting a lot of insight into the world, and a lot of it isn't going to pay off until much later, which for character people, that's fine. We've had all the character things we want. For plot people, it's a little frustrating because you're going to get to the end and go, where's my resolution for these things? And I hate to say it. Read and find out. It hurts my heart a little because it's a valid criticism of the trilogy that it doesn't end hugely satisfying if you've been reading it for the plot. All I can say to that is if you do keep going, the next couple of trilogies will please you much more. So with that, I'm going to get into spoilers. Okay, spoilers. At the end of Assassin's Quest, Fitz is dead. Like, dead. And I'm not a fan of a resurrection trope. I think it can often be cheap, it can seem like a cheat, it can take a lot of meaning away from what just happened. And I have to say that under the very skilled hands of Robin Hobb, neither of those things are true. The death of Fitz is meaningful. It has massive impact in the story from here on out. Fitz is dead. He has died. People are aware he's died. There has been a mourning for him from the few people who still cared. He has been buried. He is dead. The opening of Assassin's Quest is him needing to regain his humanity and losing the savagery, losing the instinctiveness of being part of a wolf. Takes him a long time because he kind of doesn't want to. He doesn't want to go back to political intrigue and lies and cruelty and all of the things he suffered. He doesn't want to come back. So the first section of the book is Fitz deciding, really, if he wants to be a person again. And does he want to be a man? Does he want to be separate from Night Eyes? And in being instinctive, in being very savage, he lashes out at the people who remain and still care for him because he's a young man and he's just died after being tortured for weeks on end. So this is the birth of Fitz's genuine PTSD. This is where his already simmering depression comes to full fruition, and these are elements to his characters that travel with him for quite some time. And knowing that is really important. He still regains, that's a ridiculous sentence. He still has the connection to Verity, and that's important because it means he still knows that Verity is alive, which again drives a lot of the next portion of the book. So from here I'm going to get into heavy spoilers, where really if you haven't read Assassin's Quest, you shouldn't be listening. And to be fair, if you have read Assassin's Quest, you're doing what I did when I found BookTube, which was just find out what other people thought. So here are my thoughts about Assassin's Quest. There's a lot of things that happen that there are divided opinions on. Not least of which the fact that it's 1,000,000 pages long and some people don't think it needed to be. I think it did, but I have the advantage of having read it multiple times, and very few people are going to do that. And I have to acknowledge that my experience is not what most people are experiencing. My understanding of the characters comes from the second, third, repeat readings where I'm not chasing the plot. I'm not reading it to find out what happens. I know what happens. I can spend time watching the development of the story and watching the interactions, and those have given me the most pleasure in reading this book. So for those who have read it once but it's still sort of in your mind, I highly recommend a reread, because there's a lot there. And if all you've read is Farseer, you'll get value out of that. If you've read further, the more you will get out of this, because this trilogy echoes its way all the way through the entire realm of the Elderlings. Right to the last book, you are still getting callbacks to things that happened in these first 3 books, and in Assassin's Quest the most. Fitz and Night Eyes begin the story bonded. They are one physical entity. And that bonded time affects their relationship on a significantly profound level. They have been a single entity. And that means that Night Eyes and Fitz don't really exist as separate beings anymore. They are one entity in 2 bodies. The wolf thinks much more like a human than any other bonded wolf would, and Fitz has a lot of very basic drives that are present in wolves. And that's not to say that he's an animal. A lot of his things are simply very primal. His need to protect, his need to take care of his family. It's become very black and white for him. There are no huge shades of grey in a very wolf-like manner. And it's important, I think, to recognise that in him. He does react almost childlike in a lot of ways from here on out, because the wolf part of him does. That's, the behaviour we started to see in Royal Assassin, where he was far easier to anger, he was far more likely to lash out physically. That becomes a deeper part of his personality, rather than something that only happened at heightened states of emotion. So that's a really important part of the story. And of course, during all of our journeying, Night Eyes makes some fairly significant inroads for himself as a wolf. He goes and spends time as a wolf. And this is where the differences that were formed in him when he and Fitz were bonded have altered him as a wolf. He registers that he thinks very differently to other wolves, and that his connection to Fitz is so profound that when Verity skill commands Fitz to come to him, it affects Night Eyes as well. And there's a tragedy in that, and one that gives his character some pathos of his own. He's genuinely caught up in this thing that doesn't involve him, and he's doing it because he's part of Fitz. And there's a true sadness to that. When he finds out, because he's a moron and it hasn't clicked already, when he finds out that Molly is about to give birth to his baby in a skill dream, and everything falls into place for him, seriously, why did it take him so long? The wolf in him immediately is, we have a cub, we have to go and protect the cub, only to then get Burricks with them, and he will look after them. And the just instant trust that both he and Night Eyes have, that until he gets back, Burrick will do all of the things that he hopes he would have done. So, and that becomes a painful thing, because there's a lot of love in that trust, and the heartbreak that follows is made doubly heartbreaking for that. Which brings me to my next thought that is divisive. A lot of people struggle with Burrick and Molly forming a relationship. I never did, but that's because I never really liked Molly as a partner for Fitz. I think she never saw who he was. He wasn't a complete person to Molly. Molly never even met Night Eyes. So that always bothered me. And Molly's older than Fitz, keep in mind. She's probably 2 years older than Fitz, and we don't really know how old Fitz is. And Burke isn't as old as Fitz thinks he is. Fitz met Burke when he was a small boy, when anybody tall was a grown-up and was old. And Burke was a man at that stage, of an age with his father, which, okay, makes him a generation removed. But these are small generations. Chivalry will have had Fitz probably around the age of 18, 19. And so given those ages, Burke is maybe that much older than Fitz. Molly being older than Fitz brings that age gap down to about 12, 15 years, and that actually isn't too bad for me. I'm okay with that. Not ideal, but I'm okay with that. That's fine. I think Burke deserves some happiness. When he returns to the cottage and finds the dead forged one in Fitz's shirt with the pin and believes Fitz to be dead, he grieves, and he's grieving hard out. And Molly doesn't get it because she's already done her grieving. But Burke still thought he was alive, well, knew he was alive at that stage. So this grief comes out of nowhere for Molly. And Burke isn't just mourning Fitz. Burke is mourning the connection that Fitz kept for him with chivalry. In losing Fitz, everything he did for Fitz, that Patience saw as betrayal, become meaningless because he did all of that and Fitz died anyway. So that behaviour that he showed the rest of the world in saving Fitz has cost him Patience as well. So losing Fitz is losing the boy he raised. It's losing his very best friend that he ever had. And it's losing the woman that he loved from afar his entire adult life. He's grieving. You know, a massive chunk of his identity has been lost with the death of Fitz. And so you see that very slow growth of the relationship with Molly. How much of that is, again, a connection to Fitz? I couldn't say. How much of his love for Nettle is about his love and that complex relationship that he has with chivalry, Patience, and Fitz. And yet it works for me. It works that it is messy. It works that it's complicated. It works that Molly has this very traumatized response to the men in her life, that she recognizes in Burke someone who won't hurt her, and that's enough for her to build her love on. And for them both to be so fierce in their protection of Nettle, I think is fabulous. And I think that those things are strong enough to build a relationship on. So I don't have a problem with Burke and Molly forming a family around Nettle. I'm okay with that. I also understand completely why it breaks Fitz. So the anger that he feels, the hurt that the outrage that he feels is completely valid. And it breaks your heart to read because it's real. Those are completely understandable emotions. So that's that part of the conflict. And then we get to the truly unsettling part of the story, where Verity, in knowing that Kettricken lost their child and there is a need for an heir to the throne, really abuses Fitz's trust. And at the moment when Fitz is at his mental weakest, steals his body so that he can ensure there's an heir for the throne. And there's an abuse on a grand scale here, because his skill is so strong, it's described as people not being able to even notice what body he's in. So the abuse of trust, not just to Fitz, but to Ketrican, is massive. And a lot of people aren't able to see past that in the story. And this is where it falls apart for me when people criticise it, because it is abuse, and in the real world that would be horrific. This isn't the real world, and it is a story. So what is the purpose of this? What was the point of that part of the story? What was the point of having somebody that Fitz respected and admired and trusted and loved? What is the point of that person abusing his trust? And it ties in, for me, I think, to the theme of a lot of the books about being more than who you are. Fitz isn't just Fitz. Fitz is an unexpected heir. He is an unexpected branch of a bloodline that, in Fool's parlance, shouldn't have existed. And the fact that he does exist throws so many other prophecies out the window. And for all that Verity loves Fitz, and for all that Verity has come to love Ketrican, he will put that love aside for his kingdom, because he's their king. And to protect his kingdom, there has to be an heir. There just has to. So where we saw Verity spend himself utterly in Assassin's Apprentice and Assassin's Quest, where he gave up his physicality, he gave up his vitality, he gave up the enjoyment of life to protect his coasts by skilling, and then he gave up the newly found love of his wife, and he gave up what comforts he could still enjoy to go on a harebrained scheme quest that might fail to save his kingdom. And then he discovers that to save his kingdom, he's ultimately never going to return. But he does it. That is his sacrifice to his kingdom. And Ketrican, to some degree, understands that and supports that. She believes that that is how somebody of royalty, somebody who has so many lives in their hands, should behave. And Fitz kind of accepts it too, because his quest has shown him that there are so many people who will never understand the hardships of living on the coast during the raids, because he did, because they were protected. And he's grown to understand that that is his blood-born duty to the people of the kingdom, is to sacrifice himself so that they can all live. And that theme around the greater good is looked at quite a lot. How evil is it? On an individual level, in this scene in particular, where Verity does abuse the trust of these two people, it's quite an evil thing. The grand scheme of things is a good thing. The kingdom has an heir, the struggles around who is going to be the next king are rendered unimportant, and so it's ultimately a good thing. So do the ends justify the means? Was it worth it? Did what Fitz and Ketrican and Verity, is what they had to pay worth what they got at the end of it? And quite often that's the theme that comes through. As you get further into the series, it becomes a lot about agency, a lot about the value of life, and again it's offset against, if that's worth X, what does that mean for Y? And this whole story explores that. And so that got very rambly, and I do apologise for that, but that's where I sit with this. I'm just trying to think if I've left anything out. Possibly the last point I want to make is the act of being absorbed by his dragon for Verity. As he was filling the dragon, it took him further and further away from his humanity. And when Fitz gives his pain over Molly and Burrick forming a unit around Nettle, when he gives Girl on a Dragon those thoughts, Night Eyes is very resistant to this and forcibly pushes him away from the dragon. If you give her any more, who will you be? I don't want to be bonded to a forged one. So there is a thread there of memory being humanity, memory being individuality. Without your memories, who are you? Without your memories of connection to these people, without the emotional ties to these people, what do you become? And so that's something to sort of carry with you into the next few series. If you have read Beyond, then you see where that thread goes. If you haven't, it's one of those things to keep in mind as you go, because it's very important. What makes somebody a person? And I think I've covered all of the things I wanted to talk about. I hope that this has helped you either formalise your own thoughts or create new questions. And if that's the case, please ask them in the comments. If I can answer them, I will. If I can't, I'll tell you why. And hopefully the love and understanding of this series grows as a result. That's my aim anyway. So with that, I'm going to go and have a cup of tea. I'm going to love you and leave you, and I'll see you next time.